There is a photograph of Grace Kelly taken on her wedding day, April 19th, 1956, that ran on the front page of newspapers in 47 countries. 47 countries. She was 26 years old. She was marrying a prince. She was wearing a gown that took 33 seamstresses 6 weeks to make, constructed from 125-year-old rose point lace that MGM had sourced for the occasion. MGM sourced the lace. That detail, small, easy to miss, buried in the production notes of a wedding, tells you almost everything you need to know about what actually happened on April 19th, 1956. This is a story about 3 women, 3 of the biggest names in the history of Hollywood, and 3 days, specific days, documented days, when each of them understood, with complete clarity, what the industry had actually done to them. Not gradually, not over time. One day, one moment, the thing that breaks, Grace Kelly understood it on her wedding day. Judy Garland understood it in a hotel bathroom in New York in the spring of 1950. With a piece of broken glass in her hand, Marilyn Monroe understood it on June 7th, 1962, the day Fox fired her, publicly in the press, before she found out herself, and 6 weeks later, she was dead. Hollywood called these women its greatest stars. What it actually called them, in the contracts and the memos and the decisions made in rooms they were never invited into, was something closer to inventory. And these were the days they found out. Here's something people forget about Golden Age Hollywood. It wasn't a creative industry. Not really. It was a manufacturing industry that happened to make films. MGM, 20th Century Fox, Paramount, Warner Brothers. These weren't studios in the artistic sense. They were vertical monopolies. They owned the theaters showing the films. They owned the distribution networks getting the films there. And under long-term contracts, they owned the people making the films possible. Owned is not a metaphor. When you signed with MGM, you didn't sign an employment agreement. You signed something closer to a deed. The studio controlled your name, your actual name, the one on your birth certificate, your hair color, your weight, your public statements, in some contracts, who you were allowed to be photographed with. If a male executive decided your image needed adjusting, younger, blonder, thinner, different, that decision was made without your input and carried out without your consent. You had no recourse. That was the contract you signed. And running through all of it, quiet and efficient, was a medical system that almost nobody talked about for decades. Every major studio had doctors on retainer. Not doctors whose job was to keep people healthy. Doctors whose job was to keep people working. Their salary came from the studio. Their continued employment depended on the studio's satisfaction. Their patient, in any meaningful sense, was the production schedule, Benzedrine, amphetamine, to suppress appetite and hold performers upright through 16, 18-hour days, barbiturates when the Benzedrine made sleep impossible. More Benzedrine when the barbiturates made waking impossible. Repeat, indefinitely, not in back rooms, not secretly. This was the standard of care. Doctor. Lee Siegel worked as a physician for 20th Century Fox. Years later, he told biographer Anthony Summers flat out, in those days, pills were seen as another tool to keep stars working. The doctors were caught in the middle. If one doctor would not prescribe, there was always another who would. Everyone was using pills. Everyone. Debbie Reynolds found out what that meant when she was shooting Singin' in the Rain. Her personal doctor told her to take a week off. MGM's Arthur Freed told her to see a different doctor, one who would give her vitamin shots. Reynolds later wrote, "These were possibly the same vitamins that ruined Judy Garland. That decision may have saved me from a life on stimulants." Reynolds got out. 3 women didn't. We start with the one that looked, from the outside, like a happy ending. Grace Kelly won the Academy Award for Best Actress in 1955 for The Country Girl. She was 25 years old. Alfred Hitchcock called her the perfect Hitchcock blonde, by which he meant, and said openly, that she projected intelligence and sensuality simultaneously in a way that almost no other actress could manage. Cary Grant said she was the only woman he'd worked with who made him feel he needed to raise his game. If you saw Rear Window, and if you are of a certain age, you almost certainly did, you remember exactly what Grant meant. The way she moved through a scene, the way she listened. Most actors act when they're talking. Grace Kelly acted when she was still. That stillness, that extraordinary controlled presence, was not something anyone had taught her. It was just who she was, and MGM was about to trade her away. By 1955, studio head Doris Sherry had decided Grace Kelly's commercial value was declining. The films she wanted, more dramatic, more demanding, the kind of work her talent was actually built for, were not the films generating the returns the studio needed. What they wanted was lighter, more controllable. Grace Kelly didn't want that. And into this standoff walked Prince Rainier III of Monaco. Here is what the official story says: a fairy tale. A beautiful actress meets a charming prince at the Cannes Film Festival in May 1955. Romance, courtship, marriage, the end of one life and the beginning of something better. Here is what the documents say. Monaco in 1955 was in financial crisis. The principality's primary revenue source, the Casino de Monte Carlo, was bleeding money. Rainier needed a solution. His advisors had identified the options: a major injection of foreign capital, or a high-profile marriage to an American woman that would generate international tourism and stabilize Monaco's relationship with France, which was threatening annexation if Rainier died without an heir. MGM needed something too. The studio had agreed to finance and distribute a documentary about Monaco, the story of Monaco, in exchange for exclusive film rights to the royal wedding, a wedding that would be watched by 30 million people on television. That would run in cinemas worldwide as a short feature. MGM wasn't just attending Grace Kelly's wedding, MGM was producing it. The studio sourced the dress fabric, the 125 years old lace. They managed the press access. They held the film rights, and they released Grace Kelly from her contract, a contract with 2 years remaining. In exchange for Rainier's cooperation, he got a famous American wife whose face would appear on every magazine cover in the Western world. MGM got a film. Grace Kelly got out of her contract. Nobody asked her what she wanted. She found out what the arrangement actually was in pieces. Not in one conversation, in fragments, over weeks. A detail from a studio lawyer, a clause in an agreement, a conversation with her agent that went sideways in a way she didn't fully understand until later. By the time she understood the full picture, the wedding was 3 weeks away. Judith Balaban Quine, Grace Kelly's closest friend, one of her 6 bridesmaids, and later, author of The Bridesmaids, described a conversation she had with Grace the night before the wedding. They were sitting in Kelly's room at the Hotel de Paris, late. The wedding was in the morning, and Grace Kelly said, "I keep thinking about the contract, about what it means that MGM arranged all this. I feel like I've been traded." Traded, that was the word she used. The following morning, she put on the dress. She walked up the aisle of the Cathedral of Our Lady Immaculate. She married Rainier. The cameras rolled. 30 million people watched. She never made another film. Rainier's constitution, the actual governing legal document of Monaco, did not permit the princess to work as an actress. Not informally discouraged, constitutionally prohibited. Grace Kelly, who Hitchcock had called the greatest actress of her generation, was legally barred from acting by the country she'd married into. Hitchcock approached her in 1962 about Marnie. She wanted to do it. Rainier said no. Monaco's citizens, who had come to regard their princess as a symbol of the principality, not a person with a career, protested publicly at the suggestion. She withdrew. In 1974, she told an interviewer, "I'd like to do a film. I have the right temperament for it still, but it's not possible here. It's simply not something that is done. Not something that is done." She died in September 1982. A car accident on the mountain road she had driven hundreds of times. She was 52 years old. At the time of her death, she'd been working quietly for several years on a way to return to film, a project she was developing herself. Outside the Monaco press machine, outside Rainier's line of sight, it died with her. Grace Kelly didn't have a breakdown. She didn't collapse publicly. She didn't give anyone the dramatic exit Hollywood storylines are built on. She just slowly, quietly, over 26 years, disappeared. That was the darkest moment. Not a single day. A slow erasure. That started with a wedding 30 million people watched and called a fairy tale. If you grew up watching Judy Garland, and if you're of a certain age, she was simply part of the air. You know that moment. Not the Wizard of Oz, not Carnegie Hall, that scene. A young woman singing a Christmas song to a child, and somehow making it feel like a grief too large for the room. That was the thing about Judy Garland that no studio contract could explain, and no publicity machine could manufacture. She didn't perform emotion. She conducted it. The audience felt what she felt, directly, without translation. Cary Grant once said that watching Judy Garland work was like watching someone think out loud, that the internal life was always visible, always present. MGM saw that gift and fed it amphetamines. Frances Ethel Gum had been performing since she was 2.5 years old. By the time MGM signed her at 13, she had spent more than a decade on stages and in clubs, being told her entire worth resided in her ability to entertain. According to biographer Gerald Clark, whose Get Happy drew directly on Garland's own partial memoir, her mother Ethel had already been giving her pills before she was 10, stimulants to get through long shows, sedatives to come down after. The addiction that eventually killed her was being built before MGM ever saw her. But MGM industrialized it. Louis B. Mayer called her my little hunchback. She was 4 feet 11, naturally petite, and Mayer had decided she read as overweight on screen. He called her a fat little pig in pigtails in front of other people. In front of her, she was 14 years old. When Wizard of Oz went into production in 1938, Judy was 16. The studio put her on a diet of black coffee, cigarettes, and chicken soup. The MGM commissary got standing instructions if Garland ordered a real meal. Bring her soup and coffee instead. When she tried to eat, the food was taken away, and the studio doctors gave her Benzedrine. When the Benzedrine made sleep impossible, barbiturates. When the barbiturates made the 5 a.m. call time impossible, Benzedrine again. She was 16. Mickey Rooney described it years later. They had us working days and nights on end. They'd give us pep pills to keep us on our feet long after we should have dropped from exhaustion. Then they'd take us to the studio hospital and knock us cold with sleeping pills. Then after 4 hours, they'd wake us up and give us the pep pills again. This went on week after week. For years, by 17, Judy Garland was already addicted to both amphetamines and barbiturates, not because she had a weakness, because her body had been chemically rewired by adults, paid to keep a child performer productive. In her own words, it was a 6-day work week at MGM for 14 years, with 18 and 24-hour shooting sessions, and a very public life devoid of normal friendships. No normal friendships. Because the studio sent monitors and chaperones whose job was to report back on what she did when she wasn't on their clock. The weight surveillance never stopped. Weekly checks. If she gained a pound, more medication. Less food, and another conversation about her value being conditional on her size. In early 1950, MGM suspended her from the production of Annie, Get Your Gun. The studio cited her emotional instability and unreliability on set. Those words, her unreliability, appeared in newspapers across the country. What the newspapers didn't say, the instability was a direct consequence of the pharmaceutical regimen the studio's own doctors had been running for over a decade. MGM created the condition, then fired her for having it. The Plaza Hotel in New York keeps its records private. What happened there in the spring of 1950 has been reconstructed from Garland's own memoir, Gerald Clark's biography, and the accounts of people who were called afterward. She was alone in the room. She found a broken glass. The cuts were small. She was found quickly. MGM's publicity machine made sure there was no press coverage. It was contained, managed, filed away, the way the studio filed everything that complicated the narrative. But something had shifted. Something that didn't shift back. Years later, in a 1967 interview with journalist Jack Hirschman, Garland said, "I had given MGM everything. Everything I had, everything I was going to have. And when I couldn't give anymore, they told the world it was my fault. My fault. That reversal, the studio making her the problem rather than the product of the problem, was the thing she came back to. Again and again for the rest of her life." MGM fired her 4 months after the Plaza, June 1950. The official statements, continued inability to fulfill her contractual obligations. She was 28 years old, 31 films made, 31. The studio that manufactured her addiction discarded her the moment that addiction made her inconvenient. She rebuilt herself anyway. Multiple times. The Carnegie Hall concert in 1961, still considered the greatest live performance ever recorded, was not a survivor finding one last moment. It was a working artist at the absolute height of her technical powers. But the foundation had cracked at the Plaza in 1950. And it cracked not because of anything Judy Garland did. It cracked under the weight of what had been put in her body before she was old enough to understand what was being done to her. She died in London, June 1969, 47 years old. The coroner wrote, "A clear picture of someone habituated to barbiturates for a very long period of time. Habituated since childhood. The press called it tragic. It was the conclusion of something that had been set in motion deliberately by adults in positions of power and professional care who decided a child's long-term health was an acceptable cost. That is a choice, not a tragedy." On June 7th, 1962, Marilyn Monroe picked up a newspaper and read that she had been fired. That's how she found out. Not a phone call, not a meeting, not the professional courtesy of being told directly. She read it in the press, a formal statement from 20th Century Fox, citing her willful violation of contract and her absence from the set without authorization. The statement had been released to the wire services before anyone from Fox called her. This was deliberate. June 1962. Marilyn Monroe was 35 years old. Something's Got to Give was meant to be her comeback. The film that would reestablish her commercial value after 3 years away from the screen. Fox had $1.5 million already spent on a production behind schedule and over budget. They blamed her for it. The real picture was more complicated. Marilyn Monroe in the spring of 1962 was not simply difficult. She was ill. The pharmaceutical management Fox's studio doctors had maintained for years had left her physically dependent on medications that made consistent performance genuinely hard. Not impossible, hard. Her co-star, Dean Martin, said, in interviews largely overlooked since she was sick. Not difficult, sick. There's a difference. Everyone on that set knew it. The studio knew it. They chose not to help her. They chose not to help her. There was also the FBI. By June 1962, The Federal Bureau of Investigation had been monitoring Marilyn Monroe for 6 years. The file had started in 1956, her marriage to playwright Arthur Miller, whose communist associations had drawn Bureau attention. By 1962, the surveillance had expanded well beyond Miller. Monroe had become politically inconvenient. Her relationship with John F. Kennedy, ongoing, documented, known to the Bureau, created the kind of security concern that J. Edgar Hoover managed not by ignoring, but by collecting, building files. Accumulating leverage. The Monroe FBI file runs to hundreds of pages. Large sections remain classified. What is visible shows phone taps, informant reports, personal correspondence intercepts, a level of surveillance that goes well beyond anything a Hollywood actress, even a famous one, would ordinarily generate. She was being watched, and she knew it. In the spring of 1962, Monroe told Dr. Greenson she believed her phone was tapped. Greenson initially attributed this to paranoia. He later revised that assessment. Her phone was tapped. On June 7th, Fox fired her publicly before she could respond. The studio statement used words like willful and violation by the evening news cycle. Marilyn Monroe was the story, the difficult star, the unreliable actress, the woman who had cost Fox millions. She gave one interview in response. "Please don't make me a joke. End the interview with what I believe. I don't mind making jokes, but I don't want to look like one. Don't make me a joke." That was June. In the 6 weeks between her firing and her death, Fox began quietly renegotiating to bring her back. The studio had realized, after the pool photographs circulated, after the media attention from the firing, that Monroe was more commercially valuable than they'd calculated. A new contract was being drafted. She died before it was signed. August 4th, 1962. Probable suicide by barbiturate overdose. Probable. The phone records from that night were removed from the telephone company's files in the days immediately after her death. Eunice Murray changed her account of the evening multiple times over the following decades. In 1985, she told a BBC crew that Robert Kennedy had been at the house that night, then stopped talking. Died in 1994. Sergeant Jack Clemens, the first police officer on scene, said Murray was running the washing machine when he arrived, laundering sheets in the middle of the night. After reporting her employer dead, nobody has ever explained the washing machine. What I keep coming back to, what I cannot get past, is the photograph taken on this Something's Got to Give set, 2 weeks before Fox fired her. She's in the pool, laughing at something off camera, laughing the way you laugh when something has actually caught you off guard and surprised you into joy. Not performing, not posing, just laughing. That photograph was taken by a unit photographer named Lawrence Schiller. He sold it to Life magazine. It ran after she died. The woman in that photograph, the one laughing in the water, not knowing, had 6 weeks left. And the institution that had managed her body, her career, and her public image for 15 years was simultaneously firing her in the press and drafting the contract to rehire her. She was worth more to them as a story than as a person. She always had been. 3 women, 3 specific days. Grace Kelly sat in a hotel room in Monaco the night before her wedding and used the word traded. She was right. The most famous wedding of the 20th century was a commercial agreement between a studio and a principality, and she was the commodity that changed hands. She spent the next 26 years living inside that agreement, legally barred from the work she was born to do. And she died on a mountain road, still trying to find a way back. Judy Garland sat in a hotel bathroom in 1950 with a piece of broken glass and understood, in the way you only understand things in the worst moments, that the institution she had given everything to had decided her suffering was her own problem. She rebuilt herself multiple times. And she died 19 years later, still carrying the chemical debt that MGM had put in her body when she was a child. Marilyn Monroe read about her own firing in a newspaper on June 7, 1962. She gave one interview, said, "Don't make me a joke." 6 weeks later, she was dead. The word on her death certificate is still probable. The phone records are still gone. The washing machine has never been explained. The men who made these decisions are largely forgotten. Dora Sherry, the studio lawyers who drafted the Monaco deal, the doctors who signed the prescription pads, the Fox executive who decided a press release was the appropriate way to fire the most famous woman in the world. They're not the ones who became iconic. These women did. Despite everything, because of everything, you grew up watching them. You knew their faces before you knew what any of it meant. And the story you were given about why their lives went the way they did, the tragedy narrative, the difficult women, the stars who couldn't handle the pressure, that story was written by the same people who built the pressure. Grace Kelly was not rescued by a prince. She was transferred to a different kind of contract. Judy Garland was not destroyed by her own weakness. She was destroyed by a studio's strength, its ability to take a child, alter her chemistry, extract what it needed, and move on. Marilyn Monroe did not fall apart. She was dismantled by multiple institutions working in the same direction. And the evidence of how they did it was removed from the record before the ink on the death certificate was dry. You deserve to know this. For a long time, nobody told you.